Welcome once again to our science lesson. Now we have been looking at the introductory bit of communities and environment, chapter 2. So we said we need some prerequisite information to help us as we go through the topic to understand the topic better, because we need to build from known to unknown, the information that we already know, that one that we can remember, and the one that we have experienced from day-to-day life. So because of that, we can continue looking at some few cues here. So one of them is this: name some microorganisms that cause diseases. Microorganisms that cause diseases. So you have already come across this in our chapter 1 when we are looking at body systems. We identified some of the changes that usually comes due to some microorganisms. We were able to find out that the body systems at some point it will not continue functioning normally due to presence of diseases. And we were able to find out that a disease is any malfunctioning of the body system. Most of them are caused by microorganisms. So this is just an acquaintance that we already have. We'll find out some of the microorganisms and, if possible, be able to mention some of the diseases that are caused by those microorganisms. Now, if, for example, we may remember, we had this Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Mycobacterium tuberculosis is a bacteria that usually causes a disease. From the name itself, you can be able to identify the type of disease. It causes the disease with the last name of the microorganism, TB. Or tuberculosis. Others, for example, Bacillus anthracis. Bacillus anthracis. Again, the last part of that name, the genus, the species name, can be able to give us the name of the disease caused by that microorganism. You can coin a name from that. It causes a disease called anthrax. We have others like Salmonella typhi. Salmonella typhi. Again, from the species name, we can again be able to remember very easily the type of disease. That one causes a type of fever called typhoid. We have another bacteria. There are so many. Vibrio cholerae. Again, this one you can easily remember. Again, just from the generic name of the microorganism, you can be able to tell the disease. The disease is called cholera. So there are many. If we look at parasitic microorganisms like Plasmodium vivax, this one is caused by causes a disease called malaria. So we can go on and on to give several other examples. So from your internet and library, you can find several other microorganisms and the type of disease they cause. The other part that we should also understand, what causes seasons? So seasons are also part of the environment. They lead to changes in the surrounding of an organism. We may have a very rainy season, a dry season. During those period, there will be different effects on the organism, especially the growth of organism. You realize that, for instance, when it is rainy season, most of the plants will grow, and as plants grow, they encourage more of the animals or the fauna to grow. So seasons are important in this topic because they may affect the size of the population. If a season, for instance, comes with flooding, flooding comes with a spread of diseases. So sometimes if the spread of diseases, then in terms of human beings, it's going to affect human beings. And if it's not going to be controlled, like a disease like typhoid, it may lead to death of several human beings. So seasons become very important. So what causes seasons on Earth? There are two reasons that causes season. One is inclination of the Earth. Inclination of the Earth in respect to the position of the sun. The angle at which the Earth is inclined to the sun. So if it is direct, then most of the energy from the sun will reach the Earth, and it might affect heat distribution on Earth, which in the process will affect whether there will be more rain or less rains. The other reason, the other cause is revolution. Revolution of the Earth around the sun. Around the sun. So as the Earth revolves around the sun, different parts of the Earth will be exposed to the sun, and in doing so, it leads to different distribution and heat changes on Earth, which leads to seasons. The other part is this. Identify some ways in which humans or human beings affect the ecosystem. How do you affect the ecosystem? So there are several ways. For instance, if there is clearing of land or forest environment, so that it creates maybe space for building, space for road construction, and several others like plantation farming, then it may have an effect. So land clearance and logging. Land clearance and logging. The effect will be most pronounced in a forested ecosystem. So land clearance and ecosystem and land clearance and logging, which usually leads to destruction of habitats. Destruction of habitats, the home of organisms. If habitats are destroyed, then the fauna is in trouble. So in the process, it leads to decline in both the flora and fauna. Flora being plants and fauna animals. So if not checked, it may lead to extinction of the same. Now, this is one of the most abused, or one of the ways in which humans have really affected the environment, because there's pressure on land for building, for agriculture, and for several other uses. We realize that people now will want to find other new places where there are no human beings because of increase in population. Other ways include introduction of new species. Introduction of new species. Now, we have already looked at this previously in our lesson, that most of the species that are introduced are for good purposes. It could be for ornamental purpose, or you are introducing another organism to check the population of harmful organism. Maybe you are controlling a pest. We call that one biological control. But after the organism that was causing a problem in the environment has been cleared, the non-native species that was introduced becomes so productive, becomes so invasive, and in the process it displaces several other species that were present in that environment. So we were referring to those type of species as invasive species. Invasive species. We were able to give examples. One of them is water hyacinths. Water hyacinths. We have found that the effect of some of these introduced species include displacement of native species. Native species. In other words, they grow and outcompete the native species, and in doing so, it will cause a problem because it decreases biodiversity richness of that ecosystem. In other words, it becomes the most dominant organism, if it's an animal or a plant, at the expense of other native species. Others include mining, building. Mining and building has nearly the same effect of land clearance, but it also comes with introduction of harmful substances in the ecosystem, what we call pollution. For instance, mining that is involving a lot of earth machine, there will be introduction of chemicals in that environment. For example, if it is an open cast type of mining, after the end of mining period, some huge holes are left. Even during building, there's a lot of waste materials being released into the environment, leading to pollution. Damming. If, for example, a dam is dam construction, is also another activity, dam construction, and reservoir constructions. For good purpose, for storage of water, it is very good, but at the same time, it will have an effect on the ecosystem. When we have a river flowing in this direction, and then a barrier is constructed at that point. In this river we have, or just around the river, we have maybe, we can have homesteads, maybe, something like that. But as the amount of water increases at that point, it will start increasing to other areas, like that. The effect is enormous. One of the effects that may result from this damming process, as we can easily get from the diagram, If we had some people or people living at that point, they are going to be displaced. So there will be displacement of people. If we had plants at that point, the plants that cannot survive water logging, what will happen to them? They are going to die. If we had fish migratory routes along the stream, the dam has been constructed, and in the process, it's going to interfere with the normal routes through which the fish and other water organisms are going to move up and down. And also sometimes down the stream after the dam, the amount of water here is going to be less water as compared to the upstream. If we have less water here, it's going to affect the ecosystem services that was being provided by the stream to aquatic organisms. For instance, if we had breeding sites at this point, breeding sites at that point is going to be affected because now we have less water flowing down. So there are several effects. We can name several, even pollution itself, deliberate pollution. This is very common in developing countries where mostly fossil fuels are used to either drive machines or fossil fuel is the major source of energy. When fossil fuel are used, one of the products is carbon dioxide. And it has been a major problem such that it has caused a lot of changes in climate, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide and another gas called methane. So when they are released into the atmosphere, I think you have come across this fossil fuel being combusted to release energy, the byproducts. One of the major byproducts is carbon dioxide, and any other gas like methane may be being produced from a biogas generation. If they are introduced into the atmosphere in huge quantities, they usually cause what we call greenhouse effect. A greenhouse effect. A greenhouse effect. Now, greenhouse effect is where a blanket of gas, a layer of gas, is formed around or in the atmosphere, troposphere. So this is a layer of gases, these gases. So yeah, that is going to allow sun rays to pass through in form of short wavelength. But when it hits the ground, it's going to be reflected. When it's reflected, it has lost some energy. So in the process, it is a long wavelength. This is short wavelength. And then this is a long wavelength. Long wavelength are low energy waves. So because of that, they cannot permit or permeate through this layer that has been formed by gases like CO2 and methane. So in the process, this heat that was supposed to escape into the atmosphere accumulates around the Earth. So you realize that at this point, it becomes more hotter because of these gases. So because these gases are causing greenhouse effect, we call them greenhouse gases. They become greenhouse gases. They are leading to greenhouse effect. So what is greenhouse effect? The effect such that a layer is formed around the Earth, preventing escape of long wavelength after radiating from the Earth, increasing the heat around the earth. That has several effects. One of them, it causes warming around the globe. That warming is called global warming, causing global warming. Global warming has several effects. It has led to increased melting of ice caps. Ice caps melt at a rate that it is not being formed. So we have had this scenario even on a mountain like in the tropics, like Mount Kenya, where we had a lot of ice caps. Most of it has melted, and then it is becoming clearer and clearer. That is not a good sign, because those ice caps are continuous source of water that flows down the mountain in form of streams. So we have several other effects. As the ice cap melts, there's a lot of water flowing through the streams into rivers and then into oceans. So the effect that we'll have is floods. And you know the effect of floods. We know that floods, when, for example, you have a sewage system, is going to be blocked, and in the process, the waste will be floating all over. It comes with diseases. So this is a wider concept, but in the end, it was just pollution through fossil fuel combustion that has led to all of this series of actions. So pollution must be checked. In fact, there's a lot of efforts that is going on towards reducing emission of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That's why you'll hear of summits, climate summit in France or in whichever places. The next question here, what is the difference between movement of matter and energy? What is the difference between movement of matter and energy, movement of matter and energy in an ecosystem? Now, you may recall that we have two important materials in the ecosystem that must be present to sustain life. We said we must have matter and we must have energy. But their presence in the ecosystem is not is not everything, it's not enough. They must be able to move. How will they move? They'll move through trophic levels, as we have already been able to learn, that matter and energy moves through the trophic levels, through feeding process. We are going to have producers capture energy from the sun in the process of photosynthesis. It will combine with matter sometime that's already there in form of inorganic forms, and then it will flow through the ecosystem. But that movement is not the same. For matter, look at matter, and a good example could be carbon. Carbon, after being captured in form of, after being converted from low energy carbon dioxide to high energy carbohydrates, in the process of photosynthesis. The conversion here is photosynthesis. This is low energy, this is high energy. It will be in plants now. So plants will be fed on by animals like antelope. Antelope will be fed on by wild dog. Then a wild dog is fed on by a lion. So it will be allowing flow of matter, carbon, through the plants, the antelope, wild dog, and then the lion. So that is the flow. But when each one of these dies, when they die, they are going to decompose by use of decomposing microorganisms. They are going to release. During decomposition is a respiratory process. Respiration is taking place to decompose antelope. One of the raw material of either both anaerobic and aerobic respiration is carbon dioxide. It's going to be released back to the atmosphere. Wild dog dies, carbon dioxide is going to be decomposed, releasing carbon dioxide. The same to the lion. Lion dies, it is petrified or decomposed to release carbon dioxide. So in the end, the carbon that was held into the structures of these organisms is going back to the atmosphere. So in the process, there is recycling. So one very important concept about matter, as it moves through these trophic levels, is going to be recycled. So key term there, recycled. Matter is recycled. Matter is recycled. And then something else that we should know as matter flows. Matter as matter flows. The law of conservation of matter. The law of conservation of matter. Matter is neither created nor destroyed. You can't destroy, you can't create. The only thing that happens is recycling. Law of conservation of matter. Matter can neither be created nor be destroyed, but it can be recycled. That's what's happening. It is being recycled. So there's no destruction, there's no loss. Matter is not lost. Matter is not lost as it flows from one trophic level to another. So it's very important that we note that matter, as it flows through the trophic level in the ecosystems, it will be recycled. It's not going to be lost, or it's not going to be destroyed. But for energy, there is a slight difference. There is a slight difference. If we have energy, that's another from the sun. Even the energy that reaches plants, that will be used for photosynthesis to manufacture carbohydrates, some of it is lost into the atmosphere. It will be lost through convection and sometimes radiation. But as it gets into plants, when the plants are fed on by antelope, that energy will flow into the antelope. When antelope is fed on by a dog, energy flows into the dog. And when it is fed on by a hyena, energy flows into the hyena. But there's some slight difference about energy. As we have already said, from the sun, it has been lost. And then from plants to antelope, it is lost. From antelope to dog, it is lost. From dog to hyena, it is lost. So we have loss of energy. This loss of energy. That is why we said, as we were trying to look at the concept of pyramid, we said the pyramid is usually from the bottom, the producers is larger, but as you go up to the tertiary consumers, the hyena, it becomes smaller due to loss of energy. Energy is lost. Energy is lost. So the concept that we must be able to understand is that energy is lost as it flows through the ecosystem. And the other thing is that energy once lost cannot be recycled. Energy is not recycled. Is not recycled. So that one becomes the difference between the flow of matter and flow of energy through the ecosystem. Then the last bit of our cues if we can remember this, then it becomes very easy. Draw a diagram to illustrate carbon cycle. To illustrate carbon cycle. Now, for us to get it properly, we have to understand the form in which carbon is existing in the atmosphere. In the atmosphere, carbon exists in form of carbon dioxide. So some literature will quote it as carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. In the atmosphere. So in the atmosphere, it is said carbon dioxide is almost 0.0% of air. So this carbon dioxide can be able to get into plants. Will get into plants or will form part of the plants through the process of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is converting low energy carbon dioxide to high energy carbon in form of carbohydrates in plants. These plants will respire. When they respire, they break part of carbohydrates formed in the plants and it forms free carbon dioxide. So respiration. So through the process of respiration, the captured carbon in plants is released back into the atmosphere. Now, some of carbon will now flow. Remember that is matter, will flow into animals. So you'll tell me the process by which this carbon can flow from plants to animals. So from where you are, you can easily tell how does this carbon that is captured in plants, how will it get into the bodies of animals? For animals to get this, it will be by feeding. So when it feeds, it's able to get the carbon. But during respiration in animals, the carbohydrates, which is, for instance, the glucose that you get when you eat carbohydrates, like a starch, a meal of starch, it will go through the digestive system and then the carbohydrates will be broken down into glucose. That glucose will be respired in cells and in the process release carbon dioxide. So respiration, very important. But now it does not stop there. When these plants die together with animals and they are buried deep into this maybe water bodies, cementation takes place, they'll form what you call fossil fuel. Fossil fuel. They form fossil fuels. Now, fossil fuel to form, it takes a longer time, millions of years, but still it happens. So, this process by which plants are now being converted to fossil fuel. So we can say for it to happen, we must have a process, death. They must have died, or they must be dead. So death will convert carbon in animals into fossil fuels. Now, when there is combustion of fossil fuels, maybe at the industrial level, there is combustion of fossil fuel, like petrol, that part of carbon dioxide will be released back to the atmosphere. And then sometimes these animals and plants at death again, they are going to be decomposers. So decomposers again will convert the stored carbon in plants and animals back to the atmosphere, respiration. But not all carbon dioxide in the atmosphere will go back. Sometimes part of it in form of plants and animals will be held, locked in some points, sediments. In sediments, maybe there was no petrifaction, and in the process, it is locked in such an environment where there is no recycling back unless it is activated to do so. This is very common in marshy environments, boglands, where there is less respiration because of less amount of oxygen being supplied in such ecosystems. So you realize that this is a very small percentage. So most of the percent of carbon dioxide held on Earth are in sediments, either under the sea, under the beds of seas or water bodies. Then the last bit here is a water cycle. Draw a diagram to illustrate water cycle. Draw a diagram to illustrate water. Draw a diagram to illustrate water cycle. So again, most of the water in the atmosphere will be in form of water vapor. Water vapor. But this water can condense, form rains, and the rains will be on land, or when it falls on land, it will be absorbed by plants. So we can also mention the processes. This is in the atmosphere. So water vapor forming rains is called precipitation. The process here is precipitation. Then rains, to form parts of the plants, is through absorption. When it falls on the ground, it will also, the water will go into or flow into animal bodies through feeding. When you feed, maybe you are eating a fruit, the water that was in the fruit gets into your body. But as this happens, if we have sunshine or difference in saturation of water vapor, there will be evaporation from the bodies of plants. That process through which water evaporates from plant surfaces back to the atmosphere is called transpiration. Again, from animal bodies, it's not going to be transpiration, but simply evaporation. A very good example is during sweating. When you sweat comes out with a lot of water. On the surface of the skin, it evaporates back to the atmosphere. Then sometimes these rains, they'll form part of groundwater that will be stored there for some time. Again, it will be absorbed by plants. Absorption. And then this groundwater can also get to animal bodies through simple process, like when you dig a borehole, you get access to groundwater through drinking. Now, some of these rains also will form water bodies, open water bodies like lakes and seas, rivers. So in these water bodies, there may be evaporation. Evaporation to form water vapor. Some of it might again percolate from these water bodies to form groundwater. So this is the simple form of a water cycle. Then what type of weather in Australia is caused by El Nino? Type of weather in Australia caused by El Nino. El Nino. So we have to find out the meaning of El Nino. During El Nino, we have less rains, but we are going to have more sunshine than any other days. So because of that, it usually brings about drought. More sunshine than. When we have more sunshine than precipitation, more sunshine, but less precipitation, and sometimes even none. So it's going to lead to drought. But the opposite of El Nino becomes La Nina. So again, we might ask ourselves this question: what type of weather in Australia is caused by La Nina? La Nina, we have less sunshine and more precipitation. And more precipitation. So during this period, we have less sunshine and more of the precipitation. So the effects of this will be the opposite of drought. We are going to have torrential rainfall most of the period. Torrential rainfall. I think we have gone through the major parts that we might come across, and is going to help us understand these concepts. So let us go to slightly something different as we move on now. Now, to understand the meaning of ecoregions, we start from the stem word eco. This is coming from the word ecosystem. Ecosystem. Now, we have already looked at the meaning of ecosystem. We said that ecosystem is all living organisms together, or living together, functioning together with the physical environment. All living organisms, all living organisms functioning together with physical environment. Physical environment. With physical environment. But if you are going to have all these ecosystems, but before we look at that, we can just give examples of ecosystems so as we get the picture very clear. Ecoregions. Examples of these ecosystems, as we have already mentioned, could be shrubland. Shrubland. Could be aquatic systems, water systems. It could be forest systems, forest lands, scrublands. Scrublands. So when we have these ecosystems linked together, several ecosystems linked together, they form an ecoregion. An ecoregion. So for us to define an ecoregion, the first thing that should come in our mind is ecosystem, but not just one, several have come together. They are linked together to form an ecoregion. But now, this ecoregion will not just be a small area, because now it is having several ecosystems. So it becomes a larger area. Each of these ecosystem has different community. There's a different community here, different one. And also you may realize that it has also, for example, if I may just add health, mangrove ecosystem, it also has different landforms. So communities are different, landforms are also different. The patterns of this ecosystem are also differing a little bit. This ecosystem is different from this. The patterns are different. So at the end of it, if we bring all of them together, we link together, they form an ecoregion. So in this case, we can define an ecoregion as ecoregion. Ecoregion now becomes a large area, as we have already said, a large area with distinct communities, with distinct communities. We are going to have different communities, landforms. The landform is not going to be the same. It could be desert environment, mountain. It could be a plain area, or even at the riverbed, it forms an ecosystem, and different patterns of ecosystems when they are linked together. And they are linked together. Example here. So as we look at the example, the idea is we are going to have different ecosystems that have been linked together to form now the ecoregion. Example could be a mountain or montane scrubland, that is. So already on the montane region, we have different ecosystems, but together with the shrubland, it becomes complex, or a complexity of different ecosystems, so forming an ecoregion. Ecoregion, in simple term, is usually larger than an ecosystem. So examples of Australian concept, we have different types that we are going to look at. It is divided into 7 ecoregions. Ecoregions of Australia. Are divided into 7. So we shall just mention some of them. So we have desert and dry land, desert and dry shrubland. So when the word or the term desert, when it comes into your mind, one thing that should strike very fast, you look at the amount of rainfall, you look at temperature fluctuation. So in this type of ecoregion, we are going to have very high fluctuation of temperatures. So it is characterized by high fluctuation of temperature. So yeah, that when it is summer day, it's going to reach up to almost 50 degrees Celsius. So in a summer day, it will be the highest, almost reaching 50 degrees Celsius. And then on a winter night, reaching approximately -7 degrees Celsius. So if you look at the fluctuation here, the range, that difference, the annual range, if it was on a day basis, you realize that the range is so wide, such that day of summer is very high, and night during winter season, it is very low, -7. And then this one comes with a low amount of rainfall, low precipitation per annum. The precipitation cannot be even above approximately 250 millimeter per year. So the first one is desert and dry shrubland. The second is Mediterranean forests and woodlands. Mediterranean forests and woodlands. So you realize that for this summer, a very dry summer, and then winter is usually moist. The other one is tropical and subtropical. Tropical and subtropical moist broad-leaved forests. Moist droplets, broad-leaved forests. So there's a very common characteristic of tropics, such that always one thing about them is that they are humid, warm and humid. Warm and humid. Again, in terms of temperature fluctuation, there is less temperature fluctuation. In terms of rains, tropics or tropical forests receive the highest amount, receives almost 2,000 millimeter per year of rainfall. The other fourth, we have the temperate grassland and shrublands. So just to mention, we also have temperate broadleaf and mixed forests. And then we have montane grassland and scrubland. The last being the tundra ecoregion. So the most important thing is just for us to know, and then in our next lesson we are going to find out from a map. Maybe if you can get from a projector, we find out how we can identify the ecoregions from a projector around Australia. So thank you. Just prepare for the next lesson.